Unity. The game engine should be renamed to Division after the shit show that the game engine caused after they tried to pull the rug on developers with new fees that are kind of ridiculous. They announced this back in September 12, 2023 with this extensive statement on Twitter alongside a link to their website, which has now been updated now that the policy has been in many ways reversed and changed in reaction to all of the backlash. Now, I do have this video right here. Unity faces mass outrage and revolt from devs after charging fees for game installs. So you haven't kept up with the whole situation. This is a video that compiles everything that's transpired prior to today's video. This was published on September 15th, and I have all of the details about this new policy, as well as all of the feedback and all of the reactions we have seen from understandably pissed off developers. But basically what it comes down to is that they wanted to charge 20 cents per installation here, and then at higher tiers of subscription, Unity Pro and Enterprise, they charge you less per install based on how many new installs you have per month. And then making matters worse is how installation on multiple devices would count as separate installs, so fees could rack up. So if I install on a PC, laptop, Steam Deck, and ROG Ally, that's 4 installations off of one purchase. And so that's, 20 cents times 4. And so when people keep installing these games on new devices, those fees can really rack up. And then there's also no information on how Unity tracks installations. When asked for an explanation on that front, they basically said the equivalent of trust us, bro, when it comes to us keeping track of that data for you. No assurances on tracking fraudulent or pirated installations. And that also meant no assurances on how to mitigate install bombing. Maybe somebody doesn't like a developer and find a way to make it look like a game was installed a bunch of times so they can try to rack up fees against a developer they don't like. That could potentially lead to indie devs, especially, just racking up fees that could lead to financial woes that could bankrupt them. And because they haven't detailed a way to track the source of installation for Unity games, there's no way to tell if, a game is doing something for charity or if something's being offered via bundles, which Unity says those won't count towards installs. But when you don't even know how to track those installations and their sources, how do you sort this out? And then all the games made before the change would also be charged this fee after starting January 2024. So developers who made games on Unity, not knowing about this change in policy coming, they would also be charged these fees. And that really is the most egregious part, where developers feel like at any point in time, Unity can decide how much they want to charge developers. And so it's impossible to trust this game engine when developers at any point could get introduced to a new monetization model that could make their games financially not viable. And it makes it impossible for them to set their budgets when Unity keeps changing how they charge for their engine and its fees. And not to mention that with installation-based fees, because that's something that developers can't control, and because installations aren't being monetized, what that means is that it's impossible for developers to set budgets based on predicted number of installations, because again, one user might install a game on 6 different devices, and that could be 6 different installations for one purchase. Some people might install it once. And again, with install bombing being a potential factor, it was all just a completely disastrous way of trying to get money and fees out of developers who need to trust that their game engine will be consistent in not only the way it functions, but also in the way that deals are made surrounding its fees and its monetary obligations. Now, Unity tried to excuse all of this by saying that more than 90% of our customers will not be affected by this change. Only less than 10% of our developers will be affected. Not a big deal, you guys. Except less than 10% of thousands and thousands and thousands of developers is still a lot of developers. I love this community note right here. Unity states that only less than 10% of their customers will be affected, making it sound less bad than it is. As of the Gaming Report 2022, Unity had 230,000 developers. That's around 23,000 developers affected by the change. Lots of studios have posted statements about moving engines. That's like saying, well, only less than 10% of the world population will be affected by this disease, so we don't have to do anything about it. It's no big deal. Less than 10% of the world population is still a lot of people. Things got pretty quiet for a while, and then 5 days after the initial announcement surrounding installation fees was made, Unity came out with this statement on September 17th, 2023. We have heard you. We apologize for the confusion and angst the runtime fee policy we announced on Tuesday caused. We're listening, talking to our team members, community, customers, and partners, and we will be making changes to the policy. We'll share an update in a couple of days. Thank you for your honest and critical feedback. Finally, 5 days after that apology and 10 days after the initial announcement on September 22nd, 2023, Unity published the following open letter to their community, and they decided to walk back a lot of stuff and make some changes that are definitely better, but whether the trust can be repaired entirely, well, only time will tell, but that's going to be a steep uphill climb, a steep uphill battle for Unity. Many developers are saying, well, this is a lot better. The trust is gone, and there's no way I can stick with Unity after this debacle, after Unity showed that they're willing to pull the rug from under developers and are willing to just kind of drop news like this and just kind of change their pricing model for the worse without warning and risking the livelihoods of these developers. But let's take a look at Mark Whitton's letter here from September 22nd, 2023, which reads, to our community, I'm Mark Whitton, and I lead Unity Create, which includes the Unity engine and editor teams. I want to start with this. I am sorry. I don't know if this is the individual who should be sorry or if it's the executives and higher-ups, the board of directors and whatnot. Either way, he's offering his apology here. We should have spoken with you more, and we should have incorporated more of your feedback before announcing our new runtime fee policy. I don't know how this is a retrospective thing when it should have been obvious from the get-go. Our goal with this policy is to ensure we can continue to support you today and tomorrow and keep deeply investing in our game engine. You're what makes Unity great, and we know we need to listen and work hard to earn your trust. We have heard your concerns, and we're making changes in the policy we announced to address them. So here's where things definitely are an improvement. Our Unity personal plan will remain free, and there will be no runtime fee for games built on Unity Personal. So this fee right here, this whole column, consider it moot. Unity Personal is the lowest subscription tier for the Unity engine, and it's the one that a lot of up-and-coming developers will sign up to because they don't know how well their game will do, so they don't want to go pro and enterprise from the get-go because the subscription prices for those are pretty expensive. So now those in the personal tier of Unity will not have to worry about installation fees at all, or just any kind of fee for that matter. And on top of that, they've increased the cap of revenue for Unity Personal from $100,000 to $200,000 and will remove the requirement to use the Made with Unity splash screen. This cap defines the point at which after you make a certain amount of money, you will have to upgrade to a higher tier of Unity. So whereas before, you'd be forced to upgrade after $100,000 in revenue, that has now been increased to $200,000. That's per year, by the way. And keep in mind that Unity Personal is free. So, you know, that there's a good safety net there for up-and-coming developers to kind of test the waters on game development before they're forced to upgrade to a higher tier when their projects become more financially viable, when they start making more money off of their game development projects. Beyond that, it's highlighted here that no game with less than $1 million in trailing 12-month revenue will be subject to that fee. And for those creators on Unity Pro and Unity Enterprise, we're also making changes based on your feedback. The runtime fee policy will only apply beginning with the next LTS version of Unity shipping in 2024 and beyond. So whereas before, all games made across all Unity versions would have this fee applied starting January of 2024, now only games made in the newest version of Unity that's launching in 2024, only games made with that version of the engine will have this new financial obligation applied. So developers with existing games have already shipped their games and had the rug pulled on them with a previous version of this policy. Now they're safe. They don't have to worry about any of this. They only have to start worrying after they start making a game in the upcoming version of this engine. Your games that are currently shipped and the projects you're currently working on will not be included unless you choose to upgrade them to this new version of Unity. And beyond that, they've made assurances that as long as you don't upgrade to the new version of Unity, whatever financial policies were set in place for those previous versions, those will never change. We'll make sure that you can stay on the terms applicable for the version of Unity editor you're using as long as you keep using that version. And perhaps the biggest change, the one that mitigates a lot of concerns surrounding potential install bombing and the like is this right here. For games that are subject to the runtime fee, we're giving you a choice of either a 2.5% revenue share or the calculated amount based on the number of new people engaging with your game each month. Both of these numbers are self-reported. That's another big one. Before, Unity was intending to keep track of the number of installs on a game themselves and then present that data to developers and then present an invoice. Now they're saying you self-report the number of installs that you think you've accrued, you give that to us, and then we'll give you an invoice. So that way, there's no potential deception, especially because Unity's information on how they're going to keep track of that stuff, of, you know, how many installs a game has received was, trust us, bro, we have tools set in place, but with no exact details. So self-reporting on the part of developers for that data mitigates that. And on top of that, there is now an upper limit of how much you can be charged for installation fees. It's either 2.5% of revenue share or install fees, depending on which one is lower. So if your install fees exceed 2.5% revenue share, then you can forget about the install fees. You'll just be invoiced for 2.5% revenue share. This is the most you're going to be paying for this runtime fee. And so that mitigates install bombing, because if install bombing leads to installation fees going above 2.5% revenue share, then that gets discounted and you just have to pay this revenue share right here, which is reasonable enough. There is a cap now, and so developers can budget their games appropriately and know, like, what's the max I'll be charged for this fee right here, and so they can actually work their way around that. And the rest is just talking about how we want to build trust again, and we love this industry, and you're the reason why, and they announced a live fireside chat, and just are committed to providing more details, so on and so forth. And then Mark Whitton thanks us for the feedback. If you now go to Unity's website, you'll see that their FAQ section here has changed completely. That chart that I showed in my initial video, that does not exist in the website anymore. Going to Unity's website, you can now see that the FAQ section of Unity runtime fee has completely changed here. We are no longer seeing this chart. This chart is completely gone. Instead, we have this segment that highlights some key updates that I already talked about from that letter. And right here we have an FAQ segment that further details and breaks things down. They've also changed the definition of install to initial engagement, which they define as the moment that a distinct end user successfully and legitimately acquires, downloads, or engages with a game powered by the Unity runtime for the first time in a distribution channel. They further detail here that multiple device initial engagements from the same distribution channel count as one single initial engagement. Initial engagements from separate distribution channels count separately. And then here's a question asking, does installing and reinstalling a game count as two separate initial engagements? No, says the FAQ. There can only be one initial engagement event, which happens the first time the user plays the game. Here's an example provided in layman's terms. If customers buy your game from two different app stores, then you would count and report the initial engagement once per store. But if they buy your game from one app store and deploy it on two different devices, you would count and report the initial engagement once. So if I take a game from Steam and install it on multiple PC devices, those now do not count as separate installs. Whereas if I were to purchase that same game on PlayStation and install it on a PlayStation platform, that would count as a separate install. But if I have multiple PlayStations and install that PlayStation purchase game on multiple PlayStations, those count as just one install. So that makes sense. And it is detailed right here that it is now going to be a self-reporting system instead of Unity keeping track of installs. That way developers will never feel stooped because they can look at the numbers for themselves. And basically it is recommended that developers keep track of number of units sold as well as first time user download and send that information over to Unity before they get invoiced. And now the FAQ section has this new chart, a lot more simple. And you can see right here for users of the personal tier of Unity, no fees whatsoever. You don't have to worry about any of this if you're an up-and-coming developer. And again, the ceiling is 2.5% gross revenue share. It's your choice based on what's the lowest fee out of these two options. Fees will not exceed 2.5% of your game's monthly gross revenue. Fees only apply to Unity Pro and Enterprise. General reactions from developers have been that this definitely is workable, but the trust is just no longer there, and for a lot of developers, they're still considering shifting to another game engine because of the unpredictability of Unity, its leadership, and their decisions. Rami Ismail tweeted, "You know what? On first glance, I think this works. It's effectively a 2.5% revenue share for $1 million plus per year earners. no retroactivity left, LTS stability, no black box data. Yeah, I think that works for every use case. Though he did highlight that I wish they had launched this because this is super acceptable. I do think a lot of the damage is done and is going to linger for quite a bit. Trust is a fickle thing, and it's hard to say exactly what the damage will be, but this should count as a first step to rebuilding that trust. Whether that trust can ever be fully rebuilt, though, again, time will tell, but that's going to be a tough battle, and they're going to have to make a lot of concessions, Unity that is, to bring developers back and to show them that they will never pull something like this again. Rami Ismail has also been in contact with a number of his game developer colleagues, and he tweeted about that, saying that I'm pulling a random selection of many devs in my DMs on the Unity news, and the general temperature seems to be a mixture of relief and distrust. Relief because developers have already launched games on Unity or are pretty far into a Unity game development and had this news dropped on them, can now breathe a sigh of relief knowing that these installation fees will no longer apply to them because the retroactivity aspect of the policy has been ended. And so if they're on the current version of Unity, the fees, they don't have to worry about any of that. Primarily seems to be variations of this will at least keep us safe until we figure out if and what to switch to for now. And then last but not least, here we have this Games Radar article that interviewed not only Rami Ismail, but a number of developers, and also highlighted some tweets that they've been seeing about reactions to this apology and to this backtracking of the policy and changes that are more reasonable, but some developers are still skeptical about all of this. So right here, the headline reads, Game devs react to Unity's updated fee and apology. Some are deeply happy, others still worried for the future and eyeing different engines. So scrolling down, we'll find this quote from Gregorios Kithriotis, creative director at Sable Studio Shedworks. He said, "This is a welcome clarification from Unity, and I think their calculator is something that helps understand the repercussions of these changes. However, there's only an improvement on what were ridiculous and unfeasible terms to begin with. If Unity were presenting a massive price increase like this from Plus to Pro, and 2.5% off the bat, I don't think people will be happy. However, relative to the bar being on the floor, this is an improvement." Basically, the way he looks at this is 10 steps forward and 9 steps back, but they still took that 1 step forward in increasing fees. The initial proposition was so awful that this suddenly looks good, but if the current version of this policy of the runtime fee had been announced from the get-go, while we wouldn't have seen the level of revolt that we saw with the previous version of how they wanted to do installation fees, he believes that Unity would have still gotten backlash because it's still ultimately moving the goalpost forward. It's still 1 or 2 steps forward in trying to charge more to developers. And then he concludes with, ultimately, the financial implications, short to midterm, are not the issue here. The problem is the way they have treated their community of developers. It's suddenly thrown into question whether or not to recommend new developers and whether students should learn Unity or not. At the end of the day, that's the main issue. The trust, the consistency, and the communication, and the sense that Unity actually gives a shit about developers rather than their own corporate agendas. That's the area where things are completely broken right now, and reparations there are going to be incredibly tough. Rami Ismail, who's overall optimistic about Unity's update, agrees and said that there's a long road ahead to restoring trust, and some of their ubiquity might be forever lost, including in education. Right now, developers want reassurances that terms won't get changed on them again, and given the broken trust, that might be impossible to do. And then right here, we have a tweet from one of the most outspoken developers about all this aggro crap, who did say this is definitely an improvement. Is it perfect? No, but at least we can all ship our games with peace of mind and make an informed decision for the next one. At least this is not screwing over current developers and will only apply to future developers who are going to be using the future Unity engine version. And at least this will give them time to mull things over and to ship their current game without worries. So at least there's that. The safety net now is there. It's just a matter of what their future decisions will be. Here's developer Tyler Glale, who tweeted, "It's a band-aid / off-ramp so you can finish your current projects without too much worry. But going forward, the cost of Unity is now very comparable to Unreal. Unity 2.5% with a per-seat subscription license versus Unreal 5% with no subscription fee. So go on, compare." See, that's a good point. That's what I think Gregorios Kithriotis meant here when he said that if Unity were presenting a massive price increase like this from Plus to Pro and 2.5% off the bat, I don't think people would be happy. It's still a substantial increase in what Unity developers have to play, and now that the fee is comparable to what Unreal is offering, is it worth staying with Unity, especially with a broken trust? But now financially, when Unreal is comparable and has proven to be more reliable as a company, more consistent with developers and policies and contractual obligations, and many will argue is just a better, more fleshed out engine, is it worth sticking with Unity when Unreal is looking a lot more compelling, both trust-wise but also financially? But scrolling further down here, we have more developers relieved that they can finish their current projects safely. This is a quote from a Strange Scaffold head, Xavier Nelson. And then on the other hand, you've got developers like Tyler Glale being very confident that they're not going to use Unity anymore and that they're now really heavily leaning towards Unreal. And he says right here, big games take a lot longer than 1 year to make, so you can still be essentially forced to accept a new terms of service if you want to upgrade. If Unity was as stable and featureful as Unreal was, this would be less of an issue, but it kind of isn't. And they haven't done anything to indicate that they won't just keep raising the price in the future. Sure, current versions and past versions of Unity are safe, but future versions of Unity might still end up screwing over developers. And with games taking so long to make and potentially having to upgrade to newer versions of engines and being forced to use the newer technology that the newer versions of an engine allow, eventually these developers might be forced to pay that 2.5% fee or the installation fees that can only be capped up to 2.5% revenue fee. And future versions of the engine aren't safe from sudden policy changes, only current versions of the engine are, so it still might increase the cost again before you can release the game. And then he continued, one of the big reasons to pick Unity over Unreal was the lack of a rev share, because Unreal is a more capable engine with a lot of absolute cutting-edge tech in it. It's why AAA companies use it. It's why so many AAA companies have abandoned their own in-house engines in favor of Unreal. With both engines having similar costs now, it's getting harder to justify. Why not just use Unreal instead when it's the better engine at a price point that's not too far off from Unity? Epic knows this, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them drop their rev share percent as a response to this. Other developers like Antoine Bourdelou here, who is the general manager at indie specialist marketing agency Purple is Royal, is not super happy about all of this, is not seeing all of this as sunshine and rainbows. I mean, what were they going to do at this point but apologize? It's the only choice they had if they didn't want to experience a massive boycott. They had to find a way to present this as a we listen kind of a thing, but this all could have gone down so much easier if they had done that listening and feedback gathering before announcing something so vague and concerning in the first place, which I agree with. I think Unity will have a hard time healing the breach of trust that they created here, is the sentiment. And then Hover Sports Studios co-owner Maxwell Kunz is relieved, but isn't running back to Unity with open arms. I have lost way too much trust and will likely end up picking another engine anyway, even if this is a good change. For the long term, he believes Unity can no longer be trusted. And then he says right here, the fact that they still want some kind of, per installation or per initial engagement fee to exist at all, even if the numbers are self-reported, is suspicious to me. And then he added, I'm incredibly thankful that the industry as a whole has really come together on this issue. And that's one good outcome that came out of all of this, the kind of solidarity we saw from all facets of the industry, from media outlets to developers to content creators to gaming communities. Everyone just straight up said this is bullshit and supported developers in this. And that's the reason that this kind of change happened, because people spread the word about all of this. And the fact that every once in a while, in such a divisive sort of landscape that is gaming, we can come together and realize when corporations are being shitty and push back and get some results. The fact that that can happen from time to time, and we can find like a quote-unquote common enemy of just what is essentially just pure unadulterated greed, at least that's something. Moving forward, though, Unity, I don't expect that Unity will be the same ever again, and that developers' trust in Unity will be the same ever again. I expect that Godot and Unreal will enjoy a wave of new customers on their end, and that's only natural when Unity has broken trust to this degree. But, ladies and gentlemen, that's kind of everything you need to know about this whole Unity saga. Hopefully, this will be a hard-learned lesson for Unity, and if it can start making more, consumer-friendly moves moving forward, maybe there's some chance of redemption. But The odds of that are low right now. Maybe not impossible, but very low. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on this whole situation in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.